Not only are we all very happy to meet these talented artists, but relieved to see that they're alive and well and after a rather harrowing, dramatic experience. I'm going to start with Ewan McGregor, who's obviously both the star and director. And since this is your very first feature behind the camera, first I was curious, would you have been able to direct this film had you not been starring in it? In other words, was it predicated on the fact that you were the actor and then you could be the director?
I was, yes, the actor first. And when I became the director, I certainly didn't think to recast myself. Because nobody could play this part like I could. And, no, but partly because for the 3 years that I was attached to play the Swede only, I dreamt of the story and I longed to play him. I felt like it was a character I hadn't played before, and so yeah, there was never a moment where I thought, I never felt before or during, or even now, that it was a bad idea to direct and act. In fact, the opposite, and in all of our publicity that we've been doing recently, it's often a question I get asked. Well, like, why, wasn't it? And the inference being that it's very tricky or difficult. And my experience of it was in actual fact the opposite, that it was the 3 days that I didn't act were the 3 last days of the shoot where we shot the funeral, and the 2 reunion days the reunion scenes were split over 2 days. And I found that was trickier, to discuss the scene with the actors and then walk away from them behind a monitor was in actual fact sort of slightly more awkward than discussing the scene with the actors and then going on set and doing the scene with them. It seemed to be quite... It was only once or twice I forgot my lines because I was enjoying the work so much, but it did happen. In the big scene at the beginning with Lou Levov and with Jennifer where he's grilling Dawn, I only had 2 lines, Dad, and then Dad. Those were my lines, and I was standing, as the Swede is described so beautifully in Roth's book, standing off to the side and not really giving any help to Dawn at all. And I was watching them act, and I was just inside. I was just going, "Oh yes, this is great." And then they both stopped, and I thought, "That's an interesting pause." Oh, yeah, that's an interesting pause. And they both looked at me and went, "Ewan, it's your line." So only once or twice did it sort of get in the way, if you like.
But that's a perfect example of why I think the direction of this film is so strong. It's a tiny decision, but obviously the director and the character are both feeling pride in the people around them. So what do? You have the camera on Dawn standing, and when she sits down again, refusing to leave, that's the first time that we actually see your face, your character's face. And it works because it's like, you understand the dynamics of the scene and you're letting them run with the emotion of it. You're just kind of pulled back.
Right. And it's not always the case, but certainly in that moment, that is the Swede's role. And you can speculate why. It's sort of, it's a tough decision that he makes, and he really leaves Dawn in the lurch there with his father. He doesn't step in. And we know, as the readers of the novel, that Lou already turned down one fiancé, somebody that the Swede wanted to marry. So the stakes are quite high. I guess if Lou says no, I don't know. And so it's he's very passive and not very helpful to poor old Dawn, who's sitting there, struggling away with Lou.
But she holds her own with Lou, and of course Jennifer Connelly holds her own with Peter Riegert, an actor that we quite love and know here in New York. Now, for Jennifer Connelly, I gather that you are associated with this project even longer than Ewan McGregor or anyone else, because there was an iteration of this about 8 years ago or so, where you were cast. Your husband, Paul Bettany, was cast as the Swede, and Evan Rachel Wood, I think, was supposed to be the daughter, I read at one time. And then it fell apart. Did you believe that it would reconstitute itself? Did you have faith that this film would get made, and at what interval?
To be honest, it fell apart, and it was pretty much off my radar for most of these years. I was not privy to the work that Tom and Gary were doing, trying to get it put back together, or to make it happen all those years between. But I was very happy to see it come back around, because it was something that I had felt very strongly about. I was really captivated by Dawn and thought it was a really exciting prospect, being able to play her, being able to play such a complex character over such a long period of time, and to be able to spend time with her over the course of her life. So I was very happy to see it again.
Sure. And actually, you're raising an interesting question, which is also for Dakota Fanning. This is a film that requires you start out at this sullen 16-year-old, right? Mm-hmm. And then you're playing her in her 40s. I mean, you start out also at a very different point in time from where you end up. Now, I was wondering for you, in preparing to play this really complicated and challenging character, what kind of research did you do? How were you able to somehow take someone who on paper may not be all that sympathetic and make her your own?
I think I just let her, I didn't try to make her sympathetic or to make her understandable, or I kind of let those expectations go, and I just wanted her to be the way she was written and to be unapologetic and to be uncompromising, because that's the character. And so I kind of just went there and never really thought about if the audience was going to like her or not, because I don't think that's actually important, So I just sort of let her be the way she was written, which is violent at times and angry, and I kind of embraced that instead of worrying about how that was going to come across.
Well, the last thing that Mary would want would be for us to just like her.
Yeah, exactly.
So obviously you got inside of that. But I'm guessing, I may be completely wrong about this, that it's almost harder to then get rid of a character like Mary after playing her. In other words, that gets inside of you somehow, because it's not like just playing another uptown girl or runaway girl or whatever.
Right.
Was it harder, or?
I have a really good separation between the work that I do and the characters that I play in my own life and myself, so that's never really been something that I have struggled with. But like the scenes in the tenement when Mary's the Jane, we were filming nights and we were working until like 5 a.m, so that was an exhausting period of time, and I really felt like I was pushing myself, but it felt good, it was something that I enjoyed. It was challenging and exciting and intense in a good way.
Well, and I can tell you that the intensity of that is very much felt by the viewer. Watching it tonight for the second time, I almost had to steel myself during that sequence, because I remember that I had trouble sleeping after seeing the film the first time, because in a very good way in terms of the film's effect. If you accept that the basic thematic tension of this movie is a father-daughter story. I mean, with all due respect to the importance of Dawn, I mean, it's the quest, in a way, of Seymour Swede to not give up on this girl, and you don't know to what extent she will be able to fulfill that sense of being a daughter. And when he goes into that hovel and sees how she lives, I could almost smell the place. I could almost feel how difficult it would be. And also I remembered a line from the novel. I mean, the novel presents it in a much more graphic way, that when Seymour sees how her daughter is living and she removes, he vomits. I mean, he throws up in that space. And in a way, that was inside of me as I was watching it. And I think you did the right thing not to go graphically all the way.
Yeah. It's interesting, because it's the moment where it's actually what we played the scene outside the house when he looks in her mouth, and it's an extraordinary piece of writing from Roth, but he's looking for the truth inside his daughter's face somehow, and he describes it's like the reality hits him finally, that all is lost, I suppose, and he describes it for the this animalistic smell that's coming from inside her somehow. And yeah, he vomits on her. And I don't know that you would have forgiven me for doing that in the movie. I don't. There's some things that are best left in the novel form, you know. That would be one of them.
Yes.
But there's interesting, you know, they're really, you know, I thought John Romano did an extraordinary job adapting the novel for the screen. And, you know, my job really very much was to try and not let the film just be a film that borrowed the story from Philip Roth's novel, but somehow represented it. And so I tried very hard to do that, you know, to make the film feel like the novel. I spent such a great deal of time with it, and we all, in different ways, did, and we all have our own interpretations of it, as everyone will hear. And in a way, my desire with these characters was to allow people to have their own opinion about them, you know, to be able to, because I think in the novel, Roth is exploring so many different themes, and within all of those themes, so many different arguments, so many different angles. And even from one reading to the next, I could have a different opinion about certain things. And I wanted that for the film. I wanted people to be able to leave, you know, discussing it, talking, oh, maybe Dr. Sheila had a point, and no, she was just jealous, or, you know, I don't know. And I didn't want to write off Mary as being crazy. Like, there's a danger, I suppose, in the extreme Jainism, this extreme cultish way that she lives her life at the end, that we might just excuse her actions as an act of madness. And I didn't want that. I didn't want us to be able to excuse that. I wanted to understand why Mary does that. She's fighting for something. She's got the strength of her conviction that her father has. That's one thing he's given to her, I suppose. He's given her this extraordinary strength of conviction in the way she believes, in her beliefs, albeit they're in totally different directions. And with Dawn, I didn't want at the end, because, you know, on paper, Dawn, she has the line, when are you going to give up on her? We see her having an affair, but I wanted to see Dawn as, I didn't want to write her off at the end of the film, and for the film to be about a man who's sort of abandoned by everybody, but I wanted to understand that Dawn survives Mary. She has the strength. She allows herself to fall apart, and she rebuilds her life, and she survives Mary. And the Swede never does, you know. And I want people to be able to argue that she's maybe the stronger character as a result, you know.
Right. And actually, as long as you're bringing this up, in the novel, there's so much more, obviously, than one could put in a film of 2 hours. And there have been some very judicious deletions of a major kind. I had to go back, and I didn't even get to read the whole novel, but I know that at some point Zuckerman is reimagining all of the life of Levov. And we learn that he had a second marriage, that there were 3 sons, even though in the novel, Zuckerman doesn't really deal as much with that, and the film basically ends with the novel with Watergate and the disintegration of the family.
Sorry, I'll let you finish.
Was the script always going to leave out all of that, or was a decision made during shooting?
Yes, no, the script was always that. Yes, the novel is in 3 very particular sections. The first section is all Nathan Zuckerman. He talks about, we get to know him at the reunion. There's lots of detail about his past and lots of detail about the Swede. And the first section of the novel is really about Nathan coming to write about the Swede. And the second section and the third section, we must suppose, are what he did write about the Swede. So in actual fact, the story of the Swede and Dawn and Mary's life is written from the fantasy of the narrator, Nathan Zuckerman. It's quite interesting. I mean, he's obviously researched the subject. He's obviously spoken to Jerry at some length about it, but did Jerry know that his daughter asked her father to kiss her in the car? I don't know. Or is this Nathan Zuckerman's fantasy about this man's life? That's all quite interesting. And I very much liked it. And unlike the novel, because Zuckerman doesn't really come back into it at all at the end, but I felt like in a more traditional filmmaking sense, he should. I quite believed in it. I think it's nice that he's at the funeral at the end, and that he stops telling us the story. If you like, he starts telling us the story in the reunion scene at the beginning of the movie, and he stops when when his voiceover finishes about his thoughts about that we get people wrong. And then as the little coda, we have Mary arriving back at the funeral, which also doesn't happen in the novel. But I felt very strongly that it was the right ending for the movie, and a beautiful ending that she does indeed come back to her father.
And I did want to ask about how you envisioned, because I was shocked at the end to see Mary from behind coming back. And I guess it, for me, raised the question, and only you can perhaps answer this, what happened to Mary in the interim from the last time we saw her to this? In your mind, is she coming back with that same veil on her face, or is she coming back in a different way?
Yeah, no, because there was, we had also filmed that you see Mary from the front over the casket. And no, there was no veil. She's clearly not a Jane anymore. Ewan describes her as a nun without her habit in that scene. So no, she's clearly come back to some semblance of she's had some semblance of a normal life from what we can see. But I don't know what happened to her either during that time. But yeah, clearly that phase in her life is over.
And actually, I mean, the same question in a way for the character of Dawn, because the fact that we see Dawn at the funeral, but we don't know what happened in between, I actually was wondering, did they stay together? You know, which I know from the novel is not the case, but in the film, it leaves the question open. I mean,
yeah.
Was there any ambiguity for you about that, or?
Well, I didn't get, I never got the sense from the film, and probably because my interpretation was informed by what I knew happened in the novel, that their marriage had a happy ending. But I did feel very strongly that she really loved the Swede very deeply, and that part of her was always in love with him, and he was always her love. And I think that she's, you know, so heartbroken in that scene, the last scene that they have together, when she says, "When are you going to give up on her?" I think she, in fact, feels abandoned by him. And to me, like, the next sentence would have been, and be with me here now so we can move forward together. I don't think it was ever that she wanted to leave him. It was that she literally couldn't survive looking to the past and living in this sort of nostalgic space. And she needed to look somehow to the future, because it was literally killing her. She was so devastated by being rejected by her daughter, and then not knowing where she was, and really believing that she didn't, even if she was alive, she didn't want anything to do with her mother anymore. So I think that she always loved him, but I didn't get the sense that they had continued in their marriage.
Understood.
For the very sharp of sharp people, I'm not wearing a wedding ring in the third shot with the umbrella in the rain. So
I should have noticed it, but I didn't. Yeah. Now, you mentioned a moment ago Philip Roth, and I hope you don't mind my asking, did you have any contact with him while making the film? Has he seen the movie? Do we know what he thinks?
Yes, I didn't know. I've never met Philip Roth. I'd like to very much. I didn't meet him in the preparations because he'd signed off on the script, and I got the impression that he didn't want to be involved in, or at least I wasn't led to believe that he wanted to be involved in the making of the film in any way. I don't think that he does in the films that have been made in the past. But of course, when we finished the film, I knew maybe one day he was going to see it, and I didn't know when he was watching it. Thank goodness, because I would certainly not have been able to sleep the night before. But I was told afterwards, and Tom Rosenberg, the head of Lakeshore, phoned me and said that Philip had seen the film that afternoon. And then he shared an email that Philip wrote to his agents and said in the end of his email to please share this with the producers. And then the producers let me see it. And he liked the film very much. We all got a little framed version of his email to put on our wall, you know, as proof. And I was so relieved. I mean, because of my intention, I wanted it to feel Rothian, you know. I wanted the film to feel like Philip Roth's novel. And to find out that he, to read the words that he wrote about how he felt, he was very, very nice about some of the performances in the film and about the film itself. So I was very happy about that. It was like a weight off,
And
I guess.
I'm sure you are aware, as are many people, that Philip Roth has not always expressed his appreciation for adaptations of his work. So kudos to you that is indeed the case. I also read somewhere that the inspiration for your character is actually a real person. I don't know if this is true, but Seymour Swede Masson, M-A-S-I-N, was apparently a legendary Jewish athlete. Mason? Oh, then wait, if somebody says yes, then...
Are you there, Swede? Oh. I met his son. I met his son, the Swede's son, and he came to the edit room where we were editing. And in fact, at one point we thought we might use a montage at the beginning of the film of a period post-war feel. And he sent us some footage of the real Swede with his children. And the Swede is a real, in Weequahic High School, where Philip Roth went to school, and where this gentleman, the Swede, went, there's still a trophy case with his trophies in it. He was a Jewish high school sports star, absolutely as the Swede is in the film and in the novel. His daughter didn't become radicalized and blow up anything. I don't know that he had a daughter, but he certainly wrote about this hero that was a real hero from his high school, yeah.
Wow, okay, because I know that Philip Roth writes fiction, but very often that fiction does have some grounding either in his experience, Goodbye Columbus, whatever, or in somebody else's experience, so that answers the question. I also wanted to know, and I'll start maybe with Jennifer Connelly about this, whether being directed by your co-star is in fact any different from being directed by a so-called filmmaker. And the reason I'm starting with you is because this was also the case with Ed Harris, because you were in Pollock, and that was Ed Harris's debut as a director in addition to starring in the film. Is the dynamic any different?
It's not very dissimilar from the rhythm of working with a director who is not in the film. The only time I noticed a difference in the rhythm is, perhaps after the first take, Ewan would go and watch playback, to confirm, to see if you wanted to adjust anything or had any sort of major notes. And then we would go back, and after that, we would just be in the scene together, working together until he felt that he was happy and had it, and sometimes would review. But frankly, I've worked with actors who do that too, who get up after a take and say, oh, I just want to go check the monitor. So it's pretty, felt pretty similar. One thing that Ewan did, which actually I remember doing with Ed a couple of times, so he had completely private rehearsals. And I remember Ed at one point saying, okay, just to sort of ramp up into the scene, let's go play the scene before, and then we'll come down into it. So it's sort of extremely performance friendly in that way. Ewan we would have completely private rehearsals in the morning before we would start working, before anyone else from the crew would see the scenes. We would go in together, the cast, just the three of us, or if it was a scene with you and just with the Swede and Dawn, we would just be the two of us in a room with the door closed, and we could explore the scene unobserved, which was really wonderful. And I found that very valuable. And the only other time I had seen that was working with Ed.
And for you, I don't recall from glancing at your filmography if any of the directors you've worked with were also actors. I'm recalling Spielberg and some other very fine directors, Bill Condon. But was the experience any different for you, given that he was your co-star?
Really wasn't. I think if anything, it was felt more safe and comfortable. Like it really. No, it was a really wonderful experience, and I think Ewan wanted the actors to feel as comfortable as possible. And a lot of the scenes in this film call for a lot of vulnerability and to sort of open yourself up. So I think he just wanted to make it as safe a space as possible. So it felt wonderful to me.
And did you have a rehearsal period prior to shooting in addition to these private moments?
We had a period of a week when the actors were there before we started shooting, and we had a lot of screen tests, camera tests because we went through so many ages. And so we tested all of those looks, you know, makeup, hair, costume. And in the evenings, we would rehearse for 2 or 3 hours, and it was mainly table read. In fact, it was only table. We'd sit around, much like you do in the early days of rehearsing on stage, and we would read scenes aloud and then discuss them. And we did that from Monday to Thursday. And on the Friday, the art department had prepared the house, and we started shooting in the Levov house. And so we went out as a cast to the house, and we rehearsed all of the scenes that we were going to shoot over the next 10 days, more or less, in situ in those rooms that were already dressed and ready to go. And then that was all Friday morning. And then after lunch, I went off with little Hannah, and we shot the scene coming along the side of the river, where I pick her up and swing her around. And it was a little cheeky pre-shoot day. And it was, it gave me, I'll never forget, like, arriving and getting out of the car to go and shoot my first scene of a movie. Like, it was really something else. And I sort of glad that we were able to do it then on that afternoon. And it was also a very beautiful place, and with little Hannah, and it was just great. And we shot the scene, and it worked. You know, I went, oh no, I can do this. I can do both. It's going to be okay. And then when I arrived on Monday morning to really start shooting the film, I'd already sort of popped my cherry, is the expression I've got in my head. But anyway, you know what I mean. You know what I mean. I'd already done it before slightly, so.
That's good. Now, because you're playing characters at least three different stages, decades apart, did you have the ability to shoot relatively chronologically in sequence, or not at all?
No, not really. I mean, it's a location-based, really. All of those, yes, sometimes it's to do with period. We did it in the house. I mean, in the house, I suppose, we tried to keep things. Nah, we couldn't really.
Because then sometimes it's day.
You can't. It's day and night. You're inside, outside. You know, you're restricted by locations, generally speaking. So, you know, you pay for the location for the week and not for the 6 weeks. You know, so you shoot everything in that one location. So no, we were jumping all over the place. And even in the house, we would be shooting 1962 in the morning and 1973 in the afternoon, and you know. But it was fun. It was fun that way. And no, it worked.
Now, you just mentioned the 60s, which is, of course, almost another character in this film. And obviously, it's a very different story if one is dealing just with the Levov, with the idyllic American family, the beautiful beauty queen, the daughter who's so adorable, and except for her stutter, she'll be fantastic. But it's the press of the time. It's the title. I mean, American Pastoral, that by the end of the film has the quality of a nightmare. I won't go as far as to say, like, the Nightmare of Requiem for a Dream. You know, I'll never forget Jennifer Connelly's performance in that film, and that's a different kind of nightmare that is far more internal, I think, than the external realities, the political pressure that one feels in the film. I was young and actually grew up in the 60s. I mean, I remember the Vietnam War, and I remember what it was like to see images on TV like the one Mary reacts to, of the monk, you know, turning himself on fire. And it's horrible stuff, but for you now, I mean, this is a film made in 2016 that takes a novel of 1997 to look back on the era between 51 and, let's say, the late 60s and beyond. And I'm curious, when did each of you even learn about sort of that period? For you, this would be a very different kind of question. At what point did something like the Vietnam War or Watergate, or a sense that this country may not be the pastoral and the idyll that the 50s suggested it would be? I guess what I'm asking for is perhaps unfair, because you're not necessarily the spokespeople for Philip Roth's novel, but I want to know, how can I react to this film in the most intelligent possible way? What makes this idyllic life turn so dark? Can we blame it on politics, culture, psychology, I mean, a combination thereof. Did any of you think about that while you were making the film?
I think it's all, he presents all of those and many, many more ideas as to why Mary might have done what she did. Well, and it's up to you to decide at the end of the day if you agree with any of them. It's almost not for us to say. I mean, my belief is that none of them are. You know, Mary blows up the post office because Mary blows up the post office. That's what I think at the end of the day, or at least that was my takeaway from the novel. But, you know, you might think that Dr. Sheila's right. You might think that this girl could only express herself in some other way with this couple who don't have any spiritual life, or I don't know. I think they're pretty good parents myself, and I think Roth writes almost rather contemporarily about this, especially about the Swede, a man in the 60s, a businessman in the 60s, who takes so much time with his child. And during the passage in the book where she's gone to New York and she hasn't come home, and they don't know where she stayed, and they stop her going for the weekend. And there's a little passage in the book which is repeated conversations about Mary going to New York, and it starts, Mary going to New York, number one conversation, and it's all the Swede driving it. No, we've got to talk to her, we've got to keep talking to her. He's sort of like a modern father. So I don't know that he's I don't know, it's up for grabs. No, and in terms of the period, you're right, I wasn't alive in the 60s. Dakota, none of us were there. And we have this amazing manual of how to make this movie, which is Philip Roth's novel, American Pastoral. And then, you know, then you have to learn about the things you don't know about. I knew I had quite a lot of understanding about Vietnam and the politics around Vietnam. I certainly had a strong sense about post-war America and what that might have been like in the 50s and the American dream and the 60s and the fact that there was bombing. You know, this clip in the movie we found saying from January of last year to April of this year, there are over 4,000 bombings in America. I didn't know that. That was something that wasn't in my knowledge at all. So those things you just have to go out and learn about. You know, you just got to find out what was going on.
And I don't know if either of you did any particular research into the time period or just used the script as your point of departure.
I did. I used the script and my knowledge that I knew from my education.
Sure. And I'm going to come back to that because I know that you, well, actually, it's a question that I have for both of you, which is not directly related to American Pastoral, but since we don't have that much time, I will ask it. I found it striking when I was preparing for tonight that both of you had started out as child actors. I mean, I realized that even though the images I had of you were completely from this film, if I went back and remembered Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in America, you were a little girl in that. And then, of course, I Am Sam with Sean Penn, which was 2001. You were 8 years old, and basically that was your...
Yeah, 6.
And forgive me if you were 6 when you were shooting it, and then 8.
Turned 7, and then 7 when it came out.
And then 8 when you got nominated for a SAG award, because I remember you were the youngest, right?
Yep.
Okay. So my question really is, how were you able to balance growing up on screen with growing up internally, education, you know, becoming a vital young woman as opposed to merely an actress? You know, I'm curious for both of you.
For me, school was very, very important. It was really a haven for me. I went to wonderful school here. I grew up here in New York. I went to a school called St. Anne's, which I was there. Some of you know it. It was very important to me. I had amazing teachers, and it was really a wonderful community, and I think provided a lot of balance for me and consistency and just a great network and community. And then, but I think actually the truth is it took me a while to achieve that. I think that it kind of, in a way, because I was sort of play acting at being a grown-up, because I felt like that was kind of what was being asked of me, was to be precocious and responsible and mature on the outside in this very grown-up world with a lot of responsibilities. And so I think actually it was maybe it was a slower process of finding the work in a way that was more authentic and in a way learning to work and sort of claim this work as my own in a way that was creatively fulfilling. Yeah, maybe took me some extra years.
Okay, and for you?
What I do and what I did when I was younger was a great source of pride for me. It was something I was very proud of, and acting was, and being on a set was somewhere that I felt very comfortable and safe, and I never looked at it as this sort of evil beast that it's talked about a lot, or people ask me these questions about, like, hasn't your life been so difficult? And and the truth is that it has, but for other reasons, for reasons that we've all experienced. And it's hard for me to know, to have perspective on it yet, because I'm still young, and it just is my life,
And you've been studying at NYU, is that right? And so you've been able to, not neglect that part of your life, even as you do so many films.
No, yeah, I was homeschooled until I went to high school. I went to a regular high school, and then NYU after.
Okay. And then I have one more question before we're soon going to open it up to the audience. I couldn't help but think about something that I was reading, namely, Jennifer Connelly, you grew up with a Jewish mother and Catholic father. So I was wondering whether the tensions of the American Pastoral, the beginning mixed marriage thing, had any personal resonance for you. And then, of course, I want to ask the same question of Ewan McGregor, because though you are not Jewish, your wife is, and I gather your 4 daughters are Jewish. So just whether that had a personal resonance in terms of the film.
Not with my parents. My parents, it was not an issue in our household, but my grandparents it was. So there were some tensions there in terms of some of the choices that my parents made. I wasn't privy to all of them, but I knew I had to pretend I wasn't going to a school called St. Anne's for a little while with my grandparents, and it was kind of a little bit uncomfortable that the kindergarten was actually held in a church, and I think my dad was actually asked to convert to Judaism to marry my mom, technically, although he was never religious. It was more of a formality. So there were definitely, with my grandparents, there was some tension.
Okay. As there would be with Lou, for example, yeah. Okay, and for you?
Yeah, for me, it's really my second Jew that I've played, I guess, because in Rodrigo Garcia's film, I played a Jew called Jesus Christ. So this was...
Since I fear that many people in this audience did not see this fascinating film that was released about 3 months ago. It's called Last Days in the Desert. It's directed by Rodrigo Garcia, a name I've mentioned a few times on this stage over the years because I think he's such a gifted director who made Mother and Child, Albert Nobbs, things you can tell just by looking at her. It's one of the most extraordinary double performances that I've seen in years, where Ewan McGregor plays both a struggling Yeshua or Jesus in the desert and the devil. He plays both characters, the devil as a double of Yeshua. So, I'm sorry.
So it's definitely a beautiful movie if you haven't seen it. You see it? I'll be selling DVDs in the foyer as you leave. No, for me it was very important, for my Jewish family. It's funny, it's sort of coincidental, I suppose, but maybe not. This is a story about a Jewish man and the father of a daughter, and there's so many similarities. I saw how my wife's faith strengthened as we had our children, how it became more and more important to her than it had been when we first met. And all my children, except for my youngest, have been bat mitzvahed. One of my daughters we adopted. She's a Mongolian girl, but she converted. So it's been a part of my world. And in actual fact, in terms of faith or spirituality, it's been the only faith, because I grew up without religion. I didn't have any of that side of life to pass on to my children. And as the Jewish faith passes down through the mother anyway, there they are. They're my little Jews. And it's been great. I've really loved it. I've got a lot out of it, So it's nice. And it was very important to me at the end to hear the Mourner's Kaddish read and to remind the audience, because the Swede forgets, or does he, or turns his back, you could say, or his faith becomes less important. I mean, there's some lovely discussions in the book about the Catholic iconography that Mary has in her bedroom and how the Swede tries to persuade her to hide it when Lou comes over. And there's some lovely stuff in there. But it was nice to remind the audience at the end with the funeral that this was a Jewish man. And yeah.
Yeah.
So hopefully my mother-in-law will be very proud in Paris when she sees the film.
I have a lot more questions, but knowing that some of you do as well, we're going to raise the lights just a little so that I can see the hands that go up. And I'm going to call on them. I know a few of you have to go to your parked cars, but yes, right on the aisle over there.
Hello.
I don't know the novel, so this movie is all I know of this story. Can you tell me how closely you stayed with the adaptation in the screenplay?
The question is, how closely did you stay with the screenplay adaptation related to the novel?
Very closely. There are lots of things that happen in the novel that don't happen in the movie, of course, because one's a novel of many pages and one's a 1 hour 50 movie. And but the story, I think, John Romano beautifully wrote this, pulled the central story out of Philip Roth's novel, and what we do is try and present some of the thoughts thereafter with the movie. There are storylines. The Swede goes on to marry again. He has sons. And that we didn't feel that was necessary in the film, but very closely.
Okay, so how much did it change in the editing?
And how much did the film change in the editing process?
From the adaptation?
Not very much. Not really very much. We had there's a couple of scenes that we dropped because they didn't work in the larger story, but yeah, very little. I mean, I didn't change the order of the script. Some directors and I was encouraged to do it by some of my director friends at a certain point in the edit to now just throw it about, start at the end, go to the middle, change the order. And I never felt like I didn't see why I would want to do that. Like waste a couple of weeks in the edit doing something I didn't think I was going to do anyway. I didn't have the time. So what you see is pretty much what John wrote, yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Yes.
Mine's a little complex of a question. I guess it's a little open-ended. But I know you were saying earlier, I also didn't read the book, that you were saying that all the characters, what I found so fascinating was how complex all the characters were, and how there were so many different personalities that made you question so much. So a lot of the stereotypes, I felt like, were kind of turned upside down. The father was very maternal. The mother had less of a maternal instinct. And the rebellious teenager was female, which I was a history major. I felt like a lot of the characters I learned about were, it was very male in the fact that she was very quiet.
I'm just going to stop for 1 second because I'm never going to remember everything you're saying, just so the people on the other side can hear. It's a question that has to do with the way that the film seems to undermine stereotypes, so that you have a father who seems very maternal, a mother who may not be quite as maternal as you think, and the rebellious child in an era that was dominated by male rebellion is female. Okay, I think I got so far, so good.
Sorry. And then you have the psychiatrist who usually you're supposed to trust, but you can't really trust her. And it goes on and on, but I guess my biggest takeaway was it more difficult to relate to the characters that you played, or were you more fascinated with what you did relate to or didn't?
Okay, and finally, even though you're supposed to always trust a psychiatrist or whatever psychologist, this is not necessarily a trustworthy character, leading to the question for the actors of the extent to which they related to the complexity, to the layers of the characters. And by the way, I have to mention, because no one said it yet, one of the things that from the novel that I recall is that the Swede, Levov is having an affair with the speech therapist, with the psychologist. That's not in the film. Talk about not quite trusting that character. I don't know whether at any point you...
It's not. It's very offhand. I have no idea why Roth writes about that, but he does. He has a very brief affair. He's not having an affair through the length of the movie.
A short affair.
When Don is in the asylum, he finds himself having a quick affair with the doctor, yeah. But it's never explored after that. It's very...
True.
It's never explored in the novel very much.
Okay. But anyway, to go back to your
drunk
original
enough
question,
coffee that
I
morning
guess
or
whether it was harder, given
Roth.
that there were so many layers of the character, that
Yes, I don't know.
is that the question?
Well, it was one of the things that I found really intriguing in the novel and that I loved in the film. I think it explores judgment to an extent, and our tendency to take very black and white positions with one another and jump to conclusions about one another. I really felt that Dawn struggled with that, people making decisions about her character and the nature of her character based on very superficial criteria. And I think that everyone suffers that to an extent in the film. And then, of course, you have the whole thing is told from the point of view of this narrator, so you have to question how reliable any of it is. It's all projection. And then I love that bit at the end that says, we get each other wrong. And that's how we know we're human, is we get each other wrong. And I think that's a really interesting conversation to have, to think about the ways in which we judge one another and jump to conclusions about one another. And that was one of the things that I loved about it, and one of the things that I like about acting in general is getting to spend time with a character who maybe makes choices that I can't imagine I would ever make, and who doesn't feel familiar to me, or resemble me, and yet I have to spend the time to kind of understand that character's point of view and to have compassion for that character. And I had a lot of I don't think that I'm like Dawn, but I had a lot of compassion for what she went through and love for her, even though she made choices that I felt were different than I would make.
Yeah. And for you?
I think for me, I never really feel the need to be able to necessarily relate to the characters that I play, and it's almost more interesting to play characters that you don't relate to, that you can't totally understand. Mary, for me, when I first read this character, she's kind of a dream come true because she is so complicated and hard to figure out. And so yeah, I did the best I could, but I was interested that she was a difficult character, and I didn't want to try to simplify her.
Okay, and there was a question here. First of all, amazing performances by all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Curious if, when you're working, do you prefer a lot of takes? Do you feel when you feel like you nailed it, you want to move on? And for you, and now being the director, whatever your thoughts were, did that change being the director?
The question is about, for each of them, do you prefer when there are a lot of takes or fewer and then move on? And did that change at all for Ewan McGregor as an actor once you are directing?
I don't like lots of takes for the sake of it. I like enough takes to do your best work, that's all. And generally speaking, I find that that's somewhere between 1 and 10, depending on what you're doing. Any more than that, I start doing not such good work. I start doing work that's hoping the director's going to say, let's move on, because it gets tedious, I know there's some directors, and there's a lot of discussion about it recently, about, directors that exhaust their actors by doing 40, 50 takes. Kubrick used to do lots and lots of takes because they're trying to find some truth beyond the actor. But I think that's sort of an anti-actor stance. It's like you don't trust the actors to come up with good work. You have to exhaust them or something. I don't really understand it. I really do trust actors, and I think we are able to do work in less takes. So for me, fewer. And in this experience as a director, it was the same. We did enough takes as we needed to, and it was never very many. Sometimes it's a technical, if it's an action sequence or cars or something, then it can necessarily take more takes to get everything right. But no, it was pretty average on this film, I think.
Mm-hmm. And do you prefer fewer, more, or?
I prefer enough to feel that you've got it and then move on. But my least favorite thing is when you know you've done it as best you're ever going to do it, and they say, "Oh, let's just do one more," and you go, "Oh, why? Like we already did it so good. Like
did it,
it's going to be a letdown. Like the next one will always be a letdown because it will never be. You know, that feeling only comes one time usually."
Mm-hmm. And for you?
Yeah, there's no magic number, and every scene is different. I think sometimes I feel like we do things, and after 2 or 3 takes, you feel like, oh, I feel okay with that. And sometimes there's still something that, I mean, there have absolutely been scenes where I feel like we do 8 takes, and I'm still feeling like there's something I'm looking for, but you just have to say, okay, we have to move on. And I wish that I could just keep going until I've, found that thing that I think I'm looking for. But for the most part, so I guess it really depends on the scene.
Gentleman there?
A question about the storyline. There's this mysterious line that Mary says to the Swede about her not sending Rita.
Yeah.
And it's interesting for me whether you implied something here or was it Roth that implied.
The question is a storyline about Mary's line to the Swede about her not sending Rita.
She's very ambiguous, Rita. She's mysterious, and we don't know exactly who she is in the novel or in the movie, and I like that. I like that ambiguity. She's wearing her jacket. She knows all about her life, so she clearly does know her. But well, it doesn't matter. You can make up your own mind. I'm sure she's not using her real name with the Swede, and she might be using her real name with Mary. So she doesn't know who Rita Cohen is. And I imagine that Mary doesn't know that Rita's been meeting her father. Whatever is behind it, it's something that she's doing personally to the Swede, because the Swede to her is the enemy. He's a capitalist pig, and what she says to him at the top of that parking lot is what I think she thinks about it. He's the enemy. So, but I like that you get to make up your own minds. I've got a complete history of Rita in my head, but I won't bore you with it.
But actually, in some ways, I find among the most chilling scenes in the film are the 2 with Rita. The first one, I mean, because she seems like such a sweet thing, and how kind that a pair of gloves are being made for her. And when she turns and says she wants her, the blood runs cold kind of thing. But then the scene where she's apparently trying to seduce him, although it's not clear whether this is in fact a seduction, a power game. Does she want to have something to incriminate Levov with? But what comes through is the ultimate decency of your character. I mean, the way that this Seymour is conceived and played by you is, I mean, he's so much more a victim throughout this story than I would have assumed could be the case in a Philip Roth novel. But I think the Rita character is really the catalyst for whatever it is that you have to do vis-a-vis Mary.
Yeah, I like that scene very much, yeah. She's brilliant, Valerie Curry, who plays Rita. Quite brilliant performance. And she presents 4 different sides to herself, and yet somehow they're all Rita Cohen, and it's due to her skill as an actor, I think, Valerie's.
Yeah. Yes, right there.
Hi, I just want to say, it's amazing to see all of you because you all look just as beautiful as I do.
It's amazing to see all of you because you all look just as beautiful as I had imagined.
Requiem for a Dream and season, I am Sam and the Runaways, and it's just crazy because you guys come together and you're so poised, and it's just such an amalgamation. But my question during what's going on with the world now, did that affect how you, or do you think that it affected how you saw the film, how you played the characters, because of what's the turbulence that's happening all around us currently? And then you're going into American Pastoral, which is turbulence that happened previously.
The question is, to what extent is the current turbulence of our times something that you were conscious of or thinking about as you approached playing characters in this turbulent previous time?
I think with any creative whether it's a piece of art or theatre or a movie or a poem, whatever, it makes you think about, you makes you reflect upon your own experience. It makes you feel, that's what we're trying to do, make you feel, and when you feel something, you're questioning, why do I feel like that? Oh, it's because of this. And so that's about who we are now, in this day, this moment now. And you can't help it. That's what creation is, I suppose. And running up towards making this film, yes, you couldn't help but notice there was, sadly, things that were still going on today. However, I think it's true to say we weren't motivated to make American Pastoral now because it was relevant or because there are, political radical bombings going on or race riots in the streets. It wasn't a motivation for making the film. The only time that I was looking at images when we were in the prep. We shot the film in Pittsburgh, and there was images on the news of African American people in the street with National Guardsmen's tanks and Humvees from today. And it seemed to me to be this very similar image to the images I was looking at in the very long and lengthy and rather boring documentary that there is about the Newark riots in '67. Very similar imagery. And so when we staged the street scene, or that Vicky Uzo Aduba, who's another wonderful actor in this film, witnesses from the window, it was inspired by things I was seeing in the news from today, of course. I wanted an African-American man to be dragged and beaten by a white policeman. And that's the only time I remember thinking, okay, I'm making a point about now, then. Really, the bombing, the radical, the politics. I was very much inspired to try and make the film that Roth, the version of Roth's novel, which was very much about that unique time in the 60s when two generations, a generation and their children's generation, collided in such a spectacular way.
Okay, this will be the last question.
Since none of you lived through or were too young, or you were not born yet, lived through that, some of us were. I'm just curious, particularly for you, and whether you called on any other books or histories, or is it something really, when you were doing the research, you could say something direct this about the characters, do any other research that was really affected you that might have been used in the film?
This is a question about the preparation. Since you were not yet born at the time of these events, did you read any other books or do any other kind of research in order to get a better grasp of these characters?
I had copies of, there's lots of books written by members of the Weatherman Underground, and I didn't particularly focus on one or another. I sent one to you.
Yeah.
And I dipped in and out of those books because I had Philip Roth's novel, and I was spending so much time in that novel. But I did find interesting thoughts about those. And then there's a great documentary about the Weatherman Underground and that era. I can't remember the name of it. Maybe it is just called the Weatherman Underground. But that was very useful to me because, we used a little bit of stock footage from there at the end when you see the people on the streets with the helmets on, police motorcycle helmets and whatever. But there wasn't one book in particular that I can remember, no, other than Roth's novel.
I think that what your question is pointing us to is that even though this is adapted from a fictional work, there is such a sense of authenticity and coherence in the film, how these characters fit together as a family, even in their disjointedness, and how they express the tensions of the time. It's opening October 28th at the Lincoln Plaza, the landmark Sunshine, and I think we are very fortunate that we're among the first to see such an enigmatic, thoughtful, poignant portrait that showcases tremendous performances in the service of a story that still resonates today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.